Right. So, hi everyone. Very nice to meet you all. It's a privilege to be here today. I'm Baro. I live in Japan. I'm in Tokyo. So I'm sure there are a lot of people in the other side of the world. So today I'm here to talk a little bit about what I do here in esports over in Japan, and maybe a little bit of a esports history about as well. So I'm happy to, you know, do the talk with a little bit of the slide that I prepared. So let me just share that with you. Just give me a second. Mm, Okay. I hope you're able to see the slide and assume that you can see it. So let me see if I can do this in full screen. So yeah, so before I start, let me give you a little bit of my background. So, well, today I'm going to talk about esports business overall, and because I do that for a living. So I lead a esports advisory group at a global Big Four consulting firm that is based in Tokyo since 2017. And along that activity, I advise my, of course, clients that have interests in getting into esports business but don't know how, and at both domestic or international. Also provide think tank service to government in Japan. As you can see a little bit later, that the Japanese government themselves are very, very interested in the esports business. And I also teach at university at Keio, and so I'm also an educator. So really, really glad to be here. So I'm originally from South Korea, where, if you know, there are a lot of good StarCraft players. So I used to play a lot of games before when I was back young, but nowadays more I actually do for a living now. I have three kids, and two of them, the older boys, they are a big Fortnite players. So I get to play some Fortnite nowadays with them, which is cool. So I didn't start, as an esports consultant. So my background is actually in engineering. So I was an engineer, data scientist for about 10 years in aerospace engineering and automotive industry. And since I joined this firm in 2017, I had a hunch that perhaps esports is going to be very big, especially in Japan. So that was sort of the reason why I kind of started as a side project, but now it became a full-time commitment. So I lead a small team of esports, and along the way, I mean, it's been a blast for me, and I'm glad that I changed my career to this, because I mean, it's all the people, and like today, like Africa, the esports series, like this kind of opportunity that I would have never imagined before. Also, along the way, I got to got involved into many interesting projects, and also had a privilege to actually write a book on esports, and also was a editorial supervisor for esports business book in Japan. Yeah, so that's pretty much about me. So what I'm going to talk about today is largely three things. So one is about, I mean, being a business consultant, I need to talk a little bit about global business. I mean, the business itself as esports, and in a nutshell, in a big picture kind of sense. And I'm sure that you have seen a lot of different use cases from our previous speakers, what they do on esports space. But I'd like to give you a little bit more of a big picture kind of, kind of consulting kind of perspective, and some use cases out there. That's some pretty interesting stuff. And then I'd like to talk about how it really started. I mean, let's go back to history. And it really started in the 90s in South Korea. And let me give you a little bit of taste about what actually happened back then. And that's when I was actually growing up. I was like, a junior high school student. So, let me give you a little bit about that, background story. And I'll try to give you, the latest things that is happening over in Japan in terms of esports. Okay. So hopefully that's something interesting enough to you. So this is something that a lot of you guys already know way better than I do. So I'm not trying to go too much in depth. and I'm sure that perhaps some of the previous guest speakers have spoken about this before. But esports, we all know like the definitions and all of that, but it's really the competitive gaming side of it, the competitiveness. So we're not talking about RPGs or whatsoever, but really the game genre that has competitive edge. And this picture over here is probably the most important, picture for me as being a business consultant, because it's really important to understand that esports industry is it's a business ecosystem. So it's not like that one company does it all. So there are several, or quite a few stakeholders, business stakeholders that that operate within the ecosystem, and these are some of the main key players. So, for example, we have of course, the event organizers, and we have within the within the event we have, of course, the professional teams that are playing, and within the team we have the players that are playing within the team. And of course, for these players, teams, and events, we have sponsors that provide the capital. And being a game, not like traditional sports, we need some we need a publisher to provide the game IP. So we have the game publishers. And of course, given the fact nowadays we have a lot of platforms for broadcasting like YouTube and Twitch, so a lot of the content are being broadcasted through those platforms, and we have the esports fans. So I mean, it's really important to understand like there are these several stakeholders and how they function and what are their goals, and how what's their cash flow and all that, in order to actually advise like we do for our clients to for them to enter the esports market. So I know, like, from now on, it's going to be a lot of numbers, but I'm sure you guys already have seen a lot of these numbers before. There are a lot of popular reports out there. It's really easy to find nowadays. So just a quick Google search. But as you can see, it's a double-digit growth right now. I mean, of course, this data was before COVID, and I mean, due to COVID, we had some ups and we also some had downs. So the actual numbers have changed a little bit. And I'm sorry about the little, the formatting issue over here. But all I'm trying to say is that it's a market that's growing with the rapid speed, with the double-digit year-on-year growth, right? And if you actually see the actual breakdown of the revenue, it's very close to traditional sports like advertising, media rights, sponsorship, etc. And of course, being a game, we have a game publishing fee within that. And of course, the audience, it grows in really big time as well, in double digits. So yeah, the prize pool for events are also growing ridiculously, I would say. And I think COVID kind of helped in that sense since 2020, that a lot of the traditional sports had to stop, but it was actually the esports matches that can be actually held online that was pretty much the only option that we have. So in that sense, I think the prize pool aspect is also being increasing along that line as well. And also, depending on the country, we have larger markets like North America or China, etc. And yeah, and the viewership is also increasing. Now, here's probably a little more interesting plot for you guys, and this is by country. And sorry about the little Japanese being in there, but this is basically the x-axis is about the market size in terms of revenue, and y-axis is about the growth CAGR. And as you can see on the right hand side, which we consider as the so-called the advanced market, we have like US, China, South Korea, Germany, etc. Some countries in Europe. And on the other hand, with the high growth countries are like Southeast Asia and South America, that sort. And what's interesting is that me living in Japan, so I if I look into Japan, they're kind of in the middle. You see that they're not quite as big as the other countries, but they're not as quick in terms of the growth rate compared to like Southeast Asia or South America. So they're in that kind of midterm position, midpoint position. And if you actually divide this by per capita, by the population, by the esports population of each country, then you can see that Japan is actually going further to towards the low growth and the low market size. Right. So why this matters? So in my case, I deal with a lot of local Japanese clients and also international clients who are interested in entering to Japan market. And why this is important is because, so not by the fact that esports market, the sheer esports market is small in Japan, but it's the relativity. So for example, the if you look into the global gaming market, so I believe number one is China, number two is US, and number three is actually Japan. And it's no surprise because all those gaming companies that you guys all know, like about Mario, we have a Nintendo, we got Square Enix with Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest series and all that. So and Pokemon, and so we have like tons of great game contents that's being produced from Japan. So which makes that such a huge market as number three in the world. But on the other hand, the esports market in Japan is, for some reason, is still pretty small. And if you look in, if you think that in a different perspective, that's an opportunity, that's a potential, right? A growth potential right there. And that's the reason why I started providing this esports advisor service as part of a Big Four consulting firm. And yeah, so far it's been very I would say very successful than I actually more than I imagined. So just wanted you to know that this is how we look into different markets. And of course, but it's in the absolute figure set is still relatively small, but of course it's showing a lot of growth as well, even in Japan. So we're definitely seeing a double digit growth rate. And also in terms of audience growth, it's all the same kind of story, right? So, I mean, I'll give you all the numbers. So let me give you a little bit of a use cases, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before, but these are some of the use cases that I found interesting. And for example, this one is in Las Vegas in the U.S. Called the Luxor Hotel. So it looks like a pyramid. It's one of the famous hotels there. And if you actually go in there, there's this arena called Esports Arena, right? And it's in the middle of that it's slot machines. I've been there twice, and it's a great space. So I mean the atmosphere itself is very very flashy and very gamer friendly. And of course there's the stage for events, but of course as a user you can also play as much as you want, as long as you pay by time. And not only that, you can also order food and drinks. So excuse me. And also there's a retro arcade game area. So when I was there, so there was like of course like from old school PlayStation. I mean, we're talking about like Super Nintendo and Atari and all that. So and so we can actually see a part of history in terms of like console games and then the PC games and all that. And what kind of path that we came through. And yeah, when I was visiting, there was a father and son playing Smash Brothers and Nintendo 64, I think, together, which was pretty cool to see. This is Big Betty, a little bit more like a mobility business use case that's in Germany. So we have a truck that kind of encapsulates all the necessary gears to actually roll out a esports event whenever there's needed. So, and you can go, I mean, anywhere there's a need, that this Big Betty can deliver the equipments, necessary equipments. So that's also another interesting stuff. So these are the sort of like an example of different types of facility businesses around the world. Because I mean, as you'll find out, facility business is something really important, and in terms of esports business. So here's another one in Taiwan, which is called Esports. I mean, it's called iHotel. It's an esports hotel. So basically, you have each individual room is equipped with a high spec gaming PC, two of them, of course, and you play as a couple. And uh, of course, there's the good, great, the gaming chairs and all the great gears for you to enjoy. So it's really designed for gamers, and also if you go to the lobby space, there are tons of other gaming PCs that you can play as by the hour as you play as you pay. So yeah, this was a pretty interesting model in Taiwan, and believe it or not, we lately had a new esports hotel open over in Japan as well, in Kansai in Osaka last year. And this entire building is dedicated for esports. So I think this kind of facility, a dedicated facility, hotel business, accommodation business, is something that's gaining more popularity, I guess. China, definitely. I mean, in terms of like esports activities, they are way ahead of the game. They've done a lot. I mean, since before a long time ago. So sponsorship, of course, we're talking on Mercedes. Even like in 2017, and here's an example of L'Oreal. The cosmetic goods or shampoo, or facial goods. This is an example where they were promoting their own products at a this is a player called Faker from South Korea, League of Legends, who is one of the famous player, and basically they're just promoting their products while he's doing his interview. So that's something that's been there for a while. And in terms of other corporate sponsorship, we have Coca-Cola doing a collaboration with League of Legends to actually have this product Sprite with one of the League of Legends characters on it. So that's also something that happened before. And also Nike, they've been sponsoring Uzi, which is also a very, very famous star player, esports player in China. And as you can see on the right, there's a LeBron James that everybody knows in the NBA, and they're pretty much in the same level of popularity when it comes down to like in China market. So uh, it's sometimes people who are not really familiar with esports, they'll go like, what, like LeBron James, like so which has already happened like some time ago now. So and of course not only to that, we have like like sort of a the SDGs kind of activity going on. This was a case in Sweden, I believe. Yeah, it's called the Silver Snipers. So this team is basically a senior team where I think the average age is about 60, somewhere 60 in the 70s. And I mean, isn't that cool? Just having a senior a team like with this good looking photo shoot. They look so strong. They look so badass, and they're playing Counter Strike. And I read an interview article about them, and each of them, I mean, they all have their reasons why they joined this team, why they joined like esports. Like I think one of them was like they had some spare time after their retirement, or another one was like they wanted to get more closer, more get to know more about their grandchildren who were avid gamers apparently. So I mean they have all, like each of them has their own reasons. So I think this kind of activity is also very, very meaningful, and that's also part of the strength of esports. Like not only that you can enjoy the game itself, but it's sort of a very, very effective communication tool over the generation for different generations. So that being said, and I like to go through like how this is all started, and to the best of my knowledge, and me coming from South Korea. My take on this is that so esports business was started in Korea, South Korea, and back in the 90s. And let me give you a little bit of a background of what actually happened. And this is like part of the story where when I grew up, I was a elementary school, junior high school student back then. So I like to start from the 90s because in the early 90s in South Korea, the market, the gaming market wasn't significant in the sense that it wasn't big enough on any size, any metric. There wasn't, we didn't have any, I mean South Korea didn't have any significant like a game producer. So all the games, although there were a lot of needs, there were a lot of gamers, all the games were imported from Japan. So we're talking about Nintendo, NES, Super NES, PlayStation, all that sort. So I would say I mean the market, the Korean market back then was quite similar to the Japanese market because it was very console, heavy. And I'm sure back in the 90s, it was pretty close to in the rest of the world. But, so it was a console generation. But then what happened is that around mid 90s, so, personal computers got, integrated in our public educational system. So we started to learn about how to type and what is computer, how to use them, et cetera, et cetera. So I still remember when I was like in the second grade, we had this PC, class at school every, once a week or twice a week or something, and we learn how to type, and we learn about the basics of programming, et cetera, et cetera. So and thanks to that, gradually a lot of the households got their own PC at home. And back then, I mean, it was still like it wasn't like high speed internet or anything. It was still modem, the good old phone dial based modem. And and like if the household had a kid like me, if there's a PC for us, it's a perfect gaming tool. So the first thing we found out is how to play game with the PC. So obviously back then it was about, I don't know if anybody played it before, but the Prince of Persia kind of stuff was probably one of the first games that I ever played with the PC. But then the modem came in, so then you can actually play with others through network. Although it wasn't as fast as nowadays, but you can still play. So around that time, what came out is a game genre called MMORPG, which is kind of it's almost it's pretty standardized nowadays, but back then it was kind of something new. And if you're not familiar with MMORPG, just so you know, it's an RPG game where you can play with a lot of different multiple people at the same time. And so it happens in one space, one virtual space, but there are just tons of people who can join and play together. And this is one of the games that went really popular back then, and which I also played. And so this kind of I think kind of gave us the sort of the literacy of how to use computer professionally, and also be used to playing games with PC and with others. So that was kind of in the mid 90s. And what happened is that, so in 1998, so all of a sudden we had a game that was released by an American game company called Blizzard, and it was called StarCraft. And this was a game genre called real time strategy. And there's people who already knows there's a StarCraft 2 that's been out there for a while, but the first one really was that came out in 1998, and this was a huge hit in Korea. It was like a mega hit. So like a kid like me or around my generation or even above or below, everybody had to play this game because it was so popular. And it was like that popular. Literally, if you don't play StarCraft, you can't be involved in a conversation, for example. So it was like that serious. So but then I mean, if you're lucky, like back then when I had a computer at home, but it wasn't fast enough, so you can't really play this game. And also you had to buy the software, which I didn't own it. So but and there are also people that who don't own any computers at home. So there was this market need that they want to play StarCraft, but they don't necessarily own the hardware. So what came out is that a new business model came out called Esports Cafe. So we call it PC Bang, but it's basically a facility business, and that goes back to my some of the use cases that I showed earlier. So this so-called esports cafes got really popular. So it kind of looks like this. So I mean, you can imagine nowadays, because there's so many places like this nowadays around the world. But there's just rows of gaming PCs. Back then, it was like a regular PC with the like slightly better specs than the PCs at home. But you can pretty much play whatever game that you want, and you just pay by the hour. And it was pretty cool because even if you don't own PC at home, you can just drop by this place like you go to like a game arcade. And also the fee was pretty cheap too. Like if I remember correctly, by an hour, like I think it was 2-3 USD by an hour. And so it's still affordable to like students, like back then when I was. So like soon this culture was formed that after school you gather up with your buddies and you play some hours of StarCraft together and go back home. And this was also the same for different school level, or even for like who actually works. So it kind of became a culture. And just so you know, like when it was at the peak, there was about 20,000 esports cafes throughout South Korea, and that's a lot. And so you could pretty much anywhere you go, you could find multiple esports cafes at any neighbor. So it was that popular. Then that's how it kind of started, kind of kind of initiated. And within this esports cafe, there were like local tournaments. Of course, like it's like the marketing strategy for those esports cafes. So they threw these local tournaments, and there were some players good, and some and there was like that sort of a like ecosystem that gradually growing up. And I forgot to mention, like the bottom line of this esports business is that it's a very community based business. So it really matters of what kind of community that this game is built upon. And thanks to this really strong title called StarCraft, the entire nation Korea was I mean, the community was built upon this, a game called StarCraft. So because everybody was playing. So anyway, and also the esports cafe kind of helped it out to grow that community base even more further. And around that time, we have all of a sudden a esports dedicated channel that just pop out, and it's called On Game Nat back then. It's OGN, and around 2000. And that was pretty sensational because all of a sudden you switch on the television. I still remember after coming back from school, I turned on the television, and all of a sudden there were some dudes playing StarCraft professionally, and they were really good. And I couldn't believe my eyes, like, what's happening? Like, how can someone play StarCraft on television? Because that was shocking. But apparently some genius decided to establish this esports dedicated channel called On Game Nat, OGN. And that actually helped grow the community even further. And within OGN, there were, of course, tournaments, like so-called professional tournaments, events being organized. And that's how it became really like a professionalized. And that was early 2000. And so we had like the first pro league, StarCraft League. And what and that along the way, what really shocked a lot of, like the lay people, like the general audience, was that so in 2004 we had a StarCraft event, tournament event, and in the finals, uh, we had 100,000 people gather up to watch that final. And we're talking about, this is an era before smartphone. So people actually gather up. They somehow got to learn about that, the event that is going to happen. And 100,000 people gather up at one single spot. And this was also, this place was also not even at the capital, Seoul. It was a place called Busan, which is probably one of the further city from the capital. So actually people went there to watch him. And so this was a huge event back then. And because even the event organizer, doesn't expect that many people to show up at that day. And also for corporate sponsors, they were shocked of how esports can be this impactful. So thanks to that, a lot of the big name corporate sponsors start to join. And we're talking about all the famous names that you guys probably know, like Samsung and SKT and KT and all that. So these are the big names, big sponsor that still remains to be a big names within the space. And they this is around this time that they actually spend huge chunk of sponsorship money, and this kind of enhance the team business as well, and they become more professional. And yeah, and we also had a first esports dedicated arena. And of course, if you're a Korean citizen, especially a guy, you have a military duty, and going to a military for 2 years that was like a death sentence for a esports professional player. So that became one time a social, issue. So the government decided to, okay, let's build a esports professional team within the army, so that for those of the players, the professional players who are really good at them, could actually go to that team and still continue their career as a player. So this was like I would say, I mentioned it in my book. This is like I call this the Renaissance era of Korean esports, because a lot of cool thing happened in this area. Like nobody would dream that esports would have been this gone this big, but actually a lot of different things happen. So this was a fun time to be in Korea if you're a gamer. And if you're an old timer like myself, many star players were born in this era, and that was it was really fun, and there were a lot of fans. Actually, fan base has grown as well. But then, of course, if you have a Renaissance, there's also a downside of it. Oh, sorry about this. Sorry, on game now. Yeah, this is all the picture of that. The era of the military team as well. And what happened is that, so in 2010, unfortunately, so there was a scandal, and it was a fixed game scandal, fixed match, scandal, and this kind of made the bubble pop of the growing professional esports scene, and we all of a sudden had a bubble pop in 2010. And this was taken quite seriously because, as it turns out, it wasn't an individual, player effort, just not that. It was actually well organized, well executed, with several people, a layer of people being involved. So the police took this very seriously, and of course, this was a headline in the main news. So even people who don't know about esports before that, they learned about this fixed match scandal, and and as an aftermath to that, well, a lot of the people in the esports industry got laid off. So, for example, we have many professional professional teams or players who got, who lost their jobs, and also even for broadcasting side as well. We had two main esports dedicated broadcasting back then, but one was gone, and a lot of the league was canceled. And as you can imagine, if you're a sponsor, you would actually, this kind of thing happens. It's like it's a party pooper for for sponsors too. So they stopped sponsoring, and so a lot of the team, the leagues also has demolished as well. So it was tough time for Korean esports scene. And but and unfortunately, it wasn't just one time. So several, actually quite a few times happen, and some smaller ones, some bigger ones, but it happened frequently. So that's sort of the downside of the story. But I mean, the bottom line is that the Korean esports didn't stop there, right? So it learned it from what happened, and I would say it got more matured from there, because by the time when this everything happened, esports as it is, it's has become a part of the culture in Korea. So it's been there for over 2 decades now, and you can easily see that people nowadays just go hang out in those esports cafes, like you play a round of basketball or something. So it's like a part of culture, like how you have fun. So and for us, there's a lot of lessons to learn. And because, like, for example, like I'm gonna mention more in details later, but like Japan, where it's slow, I mean, it's just the esports activity has been relatively slow. And this is sort of the example that we can learn and try to build, try you know try not to have something like this to happen in the future. So anyway, so this was a story about Korea, and but still, I mean, the best players in some of the games are still from Korea, and we have great coaches who are acting all around the world, and so there's still a lot to learn from the South Korean example. And there's quite a few key success factors, I would say, but I just wrote down three here. So one is about the esports cafe that I mentioned. So that facility business really helped the community to grow. So similar model has happened in China as well with the esports cafe. In the US, it's more like the LAN party and kind of stuff. So different country has different model, but for South Korea, the esports cafe was one, and definitely the on-game net, the OGN, the esports dedicated broadcasting was also a huge factor that contributed to the growth of the industry. And we also had a government support actually from South Korea. So they were really proactive about the growth of this industry because it was something new. And I think it was also part that the gaming industry itself in South Korea wasn't that big back in the 90s, but despite that, this new form of entertainment, esports, was born there, and still it was like a new market. So it was a great news for government and for them to nurture the growth. So yeah, so bottom line is that. So that being said, so that's sort of the story of South Korea. And now what's happening in Japan? So where I'm based right now in Tokyo. So if you're like me, like I grew up with Mario, Zelda, all the great Japanese games, and I came to Japan about 4 years ago. And I came to Japan with a lot of expectation because you grow up as a gamer kid with a lot of Japanese IP games. And me growing up as South Korean, I expected that there would be more esports going on over in Japan. But to my surprise, back when I just arrived, nobody was familiar with esports. Not even that term was. It was very foreign to most of the people here, and which is kind of odd back then. So, but luckily, the drive actually happened, and this is from a national scale. So, for example, in 2018, and that's what the locally here they perceived the 2018 as the origin of Japanese esports scene. So we had a new organization called the Japan Esports Union, JESU, and this was organized back in 2018. So this was a dedicated body supported by the government that will promote the growth of esports business in one way or another. So this was also a very huge factor in Japan, and since then we have a lot of media exposure about esports, and it's hard to find compared to like 4 years ago. A lot of the people are well aware of what esports is nowadays, I would say. So establishment of Jesu was definitely one thing, but also not only Jesu, but actually the real government is also backing the promotion of esports business. So, for example, the Ministry of Economies, Trade and Industry is the main government body who's pushing not only esports, but of course as the name indicates, that a lot of different business activities. For example, content business, gaming itself, anime, manga, all those kind of great Japanese content business are promoted by METI, and they together with Jesu and also with my firm, we actually did an investigation last year with together with other famous stakeholders within the industry to actually set out what's going to be the actual target market size for Japan in the future for the next 5 years. So yeah, and so the actual report is actually open to public. So and it was a lot for us. It was a lot of findings because we could actually deep dive into the actual business revenues and the contributing factors and do a lot of interviews here and there. So we have a government support even from Japan as well. So that's also a huge factor, I would say. And so but my take on the Japanese activity is as follows. So a lot of the esports activity that I've seen outside of Japan are very capital centric. So what I mean by that is, like, for example, in South Korea, a lot of the esports scene was happening in Seoul, the capital, and I'm sure it's similar to other countries as well. Like it's very metropolitan city centric, but in Japan, it's actually the opposite, I would say. So it's not led by Tokyo. It's actually a very regional activity. So sorry about the language here, but what I'm trying to say here is that there's so much happening in the local side, the regional side, and this I'm only showing a portion of really a limited selection of what is happening in terms of esports throughout the Japan entire region. And as you can see, it covers pretty much all the area. So we're talking about Kyushu. Uh, we also have some activities in Okinawa, by the way, and through to all the way up in Hokkaido. So, and a lot of the activities are, actually led by local governments. So they actually allocate budget for esports activities, and whether that being events or whether that being some sort of an educational program that that they jointly provide with the local schools or universities, or it could be a joint program or partner with a private company. So, and or for example, we had or like like some historical site. For example, we had an event at a Japanese shrine the other day. And uh, so people consider, especially the local government, consider esports as a great content to you know uh, 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 create a new community. And in term, and they don't have it doesn't really target a specific age bracket. For example, I mean, that's the strength of esports, right? Depending, I mean, if you find the right game, anybody can join, like regardless of your age. And especially in Japan, in the countryside, where they are struggling with the rise of the average age of the population. This sort of content, esports content, is really helpful for them to actually build up that community. And also the fact that there are a lot of Japanese game companies already existing with a lot of great game content. So there are a lot of active activities going on within Japan right now nowadays. And not only in terms of like business. So I just wanted to give you an idea about, like, this it's not only about business. It's not only about making quick money, like monetization and all that. So it's actually more than that. So I mentioned about the communication channel, but of course there's different purposes in terms of SDGs and ESGs. So for example, what you see on the left is a doctor in Hokkaido, and his facility, his hospital, is dedicated for handicapped people. And he adopted esports, for example, League of Legends, and they start to play. And he designed some of the controllers, or usually we use mouse and keyboard, but he actually designed and provided a special controllers for their patients so that they can play. And actually, you know what? So that really, gave them, their patient, the motivation to actually, speak to each other and actually gather up as a community. And this is like an ongoing thing. They do this esports match on a regular basis, and all that livelihood and that vibe and that energy that comes out as they have more, have more fun and also more purpose. Like that's very, very valuable itself. It may not be a something like a cash monetary value, but as being a human being, that's something really valuable. So that's also like one very interesting use cases. But also another one is that for senior population. So this is another example that's happening in Japan. So we have the senior facility where a lot of the seniors gather up and live together. And this person who owns a company called Playcare, so he uses games and esports to actually also gather the community. So for example, he used two games nowadays. So one is the racing game and one is called the Taiko no Tatsujin. It's a drum game. So it's like everybody gathers together, and like other people's rooting for another person playing games, and you build that companionship, like the and that you wouldn't have it before. And that sort of makes that community life way better. And he's running a business based on that model. So he's also giving out like certificate to actually how to teach to play those games to the seniors, and also how to be a recreational agent for that community, which is also something kind of new. And we could pretty much foresee that those kind of job needs will be even more in the future, as the general population will age, as the time goes by in Japan. So I hope that gives you some idea of what's happening over here. And that kind of comes to almost the conclusion of my talk. And I just want to finish with the concluding remarks. So at the end of the day, what we find out is that, so we've done a lot of study about different countries of, how they, how Korea became, that, advanced, or China, how they became so big, and US, etc. But our bottom line is that there is no one development model for all that works for all. So different countries, different regions have their own characteristics, that has their own needs. It's different people, different demographics, different culture. So most probably it's going to be a different model if it's a country that's going to develop from now on in terms of esports business. So I mean, it can either be, it could be led by, private companies, like the case in the US, where it's mostly led by companies, or it could be led by government. For example, I think Japan is a really good use case example, but it could be hybrid. So I think depending on the region where when you belong, I think the question is finding the right model that fits your own country or your own region. And finding what's going to work the best is probably the challenging part. So there is no solid answer out there, but the good news is that there are other countries who have done trials and errors in their own way, and these are all really, really good reference points to learn from. So, and if you are at a country where esports is about to take off, or it's from now on, learn from those use cases. I mean, a lot of the informations are out there in the internet, or, if you're interested, just come talk to me. I can perhaps guide you to the right direction, and, learn from what worked out for other countries, what did not work out for other countries, and try to design, your own country's way, and try to, collaborate with the right partner, either that being a private company, or or a government. That totally depends on your region. So, and also, it's never late. So for example, like Japan, although it's been a huge gaming market for decades, esports was almost non-existent, and they just started 2018 officially. So it's only like 3 years old. And but it's never too late. They may be a slow starter, but they also have a lot of references to learn from, and they also have their own strength in terms of the size of the industry, etc. So it's late, I mean, doesn't mean anything, I would say, in this sort of in this space. So don't get discouraged. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say for the about to talk. And before I finish, I just like to point to my book that I released last year, end of last year. It's called Demystifying Esports. I gave you a little bit of a trailer about what happened in Korea, but if you want to know more in depth and a little bit about the esports business, yeah, feel free to check this out. It's available in Amazon and other book sites as well. And also, if you'd like to reach me, feel free to reach me through this email, demystifyingesport@gmail.com, or I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so just feel free to reach me there. So thank you very much, and I'm very, very happy to connect with you in the downstream as well. So good luck. Thank you.